One of the key requirements, we are now going to talk about the very ground on which an EB5 application can be refused or accepted. In fact, this particular issue of source and path of funds under the EB5 application is one of the key determinants around which most of the applications face a lot of resistance as far as USICS decision is concerned. They may decide or not to. You may choose the best regional center. You may have the best business plan. You may be able, the business plan may be able to prove that the direct jobs will be created, indirect jobs will be created. You may meet all these requirements, but then the requirement of funds that are used to make the EB5 investment is the key determinant of whether an I-526 application will be approved or disapproved. You do not meet these requirements convincingly and your application will be refused, irrespective of how well planned your application is on other grounds. Now, what is source and path of funds as far as EB5 application is concerned? Let's look at divide in two parts. What is number one is source of funds. First, the source of funds you have to prove is from where the investment is being made. How did you get those funds which you are investing? You could have earned those funds. So if you say you earned those funds, where did you earn those funds from? You say, I've sold a property to get those funds. Okay, how did you make that property? You have to prove how did you make that property. In nutshell, the entire trail through which you really speaking earned that particular asset, liquid, non-liquid, the proceeds of which are used to make that $500,000 investment, it's very, very important for you to be able to prove that how did you get those funds, how did you source those funds, how was that particular asset earned, the first and foremost stage, first and foremost thing that you must be able to convincingly prove. I mean, typically, we do narrations. So in those narrations, we will identify when did you buy a particular property, for how much did you buy that particular property. In context of most of the developing economies where, there is the registered value of the property is much less than the actual value that's paid, is most of the time you have to prove the registered value. How did you pay the registered value? So maybe you basically bought that property by taking loans. That's all right. You did it out of the proceeds of the gifts that were taken from family members. That's also fine. You just need to be able to explain how really speaking generated those funds which were bought to buy a property or otherwise another asset. So that's that one key requirement. You should be able to provide a narration of how the assets were created to prove your source of funds. It's very important to understand, and one key aspect here, that unsecured personal loans are normally not permitted as part of an EB5 application source of funds. Gifts are permitted, but not unsecured loans. That's very important for you to understand where the money is gifted to you. For example, even your 22-year-old son may be entitled to file, a daughter may be entitled to file an EB5 application through the money that you are gifting to your child. But then in that case you have gifted, so based on that the application can be filed. But as part of the application, it has to be reflected how did you earn that money in the first place which you gifted to the child. So you might have inherited an asset from parents. That particular assets, particular property that you inherited from the parents, you sold, and the proceeds of which were invested in EB5, that's fine. But you should be able to reasonably be able to explain, because at times it can go into decades. The property might have been bought by your parents from whom you inherited decades back. So at times it becomes very difficult to prove how is it that your parent earned that particular property in the first place, how did they make that property in the first place. But a reasonable narration should be provided even in case of inheritance on how did parents come to occupy that particular property or own that particular property which was inherited by you. Kind of a chain, part of proving source of funds. Gifts, yes. Inheritance, yes. Ownership through personal earnings, yes. All these should be properly documented to the maximum possible extent through bank documents or otherwise bank receipts, property ownership documents, the wills, the inheritance, the gift deed. All those documents should be very much part of the documentation that you provide along with your I-5 to 6 application. Now comes the path of funds. So you have proved that your source of funds is legitimate. Then comes the path of funds. How do you transfer those funds to your escrow account in USA? Should be through legitimate routes. It should ideally be coming out of your own account. Yes, let's say some countries there's a limit on foreign exchange transfers that can be done from one person's account, as per central banking requirements. You may transfer using the bank account. The principal applicant may use the bank account of another relation, spouse, child, but the money should initially flow from the account of the principal applicant. That's very important. And then it should flow through regular banking channels or regular financial channels, which clearly confirm that you are following a legal route for transfer of funds. Should the United States Immigration Services not be satisfied, there are all the possible options that are available, legitimate options that are available to transfer these funds. But any kind of unlawful activity that's carried out to transfer such funds, and it's highly and it's not convincing. You're transferring using your own legitimate funds, or you're transferring using illegitimate means, that particular application can be refused. So taking guidance of a professional, a good attorney, a good consultant, so that you do not take a wrong step in meeting source and path fund of requirements is very, very critically important. Having discussed the source and path of funds, it brings us to another critical aspect. What are the documents one must submit with the I-5 to 6 application? Because you have the source and path of funds. How do you prove that source and path of funds? It's lawful, it's legitimate. You prove it through the proper documents that you file with your I-5 to 6 application. What are those documents? What can be those documents? First and foremost, a few pointers that as a consultant we may like to advise you is, what's important to understand, what's important to prove here is show funds, their source and path equivalent of the investment that you do. So you're talking about, let's say your net worth otherwise is $10 million. USICS is not bothered about, United States Immigration Services is not bothered about your lawful source of accumulation of your net worth of $10 million. They would like to know, how did you acquire the minimum requirement of $1 million? So what you have to really speaking focus on proving is $1 million equivalent of minimum net worth that you have acquired, and its source. How did you acquire that? What you have to focus on and what you have to prove is lawful and legitimate transfer of $500,000, and that's it. You don't have to prove, there's no need to talk about your whole net worth. You should need to focus only on, number one, the minimum net worth, and number two, the amount that's required to be transferred, the minimum account that's required to be transferred, that's $500,000. So your source and path requirement, and meeting this requirement, your focus should be on these two key amounts that must keep in mind. What you need to do is that you should try and provide to the maximum possible the records that you have to prove that you lawfully sourced the net worth that you have. Do not get nervous if you cannot provide all the 100% documents. It's doubtful whether a person, anybody in this world will have all the documents possible to prove the net worth that's generated over a period of time. So to the extent possible, you should provide as much as you can, but if you do not feel that you have all the records available, do not get nervous. The application can still be filed based on the majority of records that you can provide to prove how you earned that particular net worth over a period of time. There is no need for you to lie. There is no need for you to, really speaking, create documents. Be honest, be straightforward, provide information on that $1 million or $500,000. That's what your focus should be. Do that truthfully. Each country's case may be dealt with differently by USICS, because the norms of the way the records are maintained in each country is different. So I think that's also what should be kept in mind when you are getting nervous about whether or not your application will be accepted. Rest assured, the immigration services, the officials are briefed and are quite familiar with the precedents that are followed in different countries. They may differ, and they'll be familiar with the system that's followed in your country also. So coming back to it, you must provide as much of records as you can, but the minimum records possible should be provided. And another thing is that even money made by the spouse can be used by another spouse. That's quite acceptable under EB5 requirements in terms of source of funds. And what are the documents that we suggest should be filed to meet the requirement of lawful source? First of all, try and give your tax returns, individual tax returns for at least last 5 years. I think it's critically important to show and prove that you indeed are having legitimate income sources. So try and give your individual, partnership, corporate financial tax returns for at least 5 years, whether they are audited or unaudited. If they are audited, that's wonderful. Even if they are not audited, do provide those financial tax returns. How did you make those investments? So for last 2 years, you can submit records of the investments, various investments that you have done, and related bank statements through which you made those investments. In the business documents, you can give your business registration records, you can give your website ID, you can give your business promotional brochure, you can even show document that show that you are proprietor of the business, or you are director of the business, or you employee of the business. So whatever document which you show that what your relationship of with that particular business is, you can do that. If you have sold any property or business which led to profit for you, capital gains for you, so you can show documents related to sale of that business or property. You should ideally submit government approved property valuers report or your accountant's report, which shows what is the value of your business. So this also could go with as part of your document. And for each business, you should have a brief summary on what that business does, when it was incorporated, who owns it, what's been the business activity over the years, what's the ownership structure, and other things. As regards real estate, should show the documents which prove how is it that you own that real estate in the first place, and that could include sale deeds, trust deeds, or mortgage documents, purchase and sale document, everything. If you have got your property valued by a government approved valuer, you should attach that with the I-526 application. And if you have rental income, you should, through which you are incurring regular income, you should show those rental and lease deed agreements. And again, for each property, you should provide a summary as part of the application. This should include a summary that provides address of the property, what price you bought it at, and what date you bought it at, for what amount you bought it at, how did you arrange for resources, the fund that were required to buy it. So it should basically, for each property, you should have a summary, and we call it narration. If you have taken a loan to invest in that particular property, then you should provide those loan documents also. Employment, if you have basically been earning your funds that you invested in creating your net worth, you should provide your related income tax returns, salaries, your perhaps tax deduction documents, and your employment contracts, your perhaps you've been covered in some newspapers, magazines. You can include that in your overall profile, that personal profile, your professional profile that you submit along with the application. You may have many other sources of income, including gifts, inheritance, divorce settlements, lawsuit settlements, or you might have won a lottery. So all these you should be properly documented as part of your I-526 application. And lastly, and most importantly, when you transfer the funds into the escrow account, a critical part of your I-526 application will be evidence related to wire transfers, confirmations, deposit slips, and bank transfer, bank statements which show the withdrawal and deposit of funds that were actually transferred, and lastly the bank letter which confirms the wire transfer. All these are very important to, really speaking, prove the path of fund. Finally, as you would have realized by now, making an EB5 application, making the petition, choosing a regional center, all these, and even the subsequent I-829 application seeking approval of the conditions attached to your green card, it's overall a complicated process. It demands guidance from an experienced consultant. Well, that's what we've been doing for almost 20 years. Our USP is guiding high net worth individuals into making applications for immigration purposes. We understand the business very well. You can always write to me personally at ajay@abhinav.com. It is ajay@abhinav.com, or simply visit our website www.abhinav.com for regular updates on EB5 process, and we'll be pleased to assist you on your dreams of becoming an EB5 green card holder of United States of America. Thank you.